Today we're going to be talking about restorative justice, among other things. I'd never heard of that, but we'll learn what the church is doing to promote restorative justice. Welcome to Wordnet. I'm your host, Jack Knight. And today, my guest is the Associate Director of the Office of Restorative Justice for the Diocese of San Bernardino, California. That's a mouthful. And my guest is one who's been working in this area for about 5 years now, a well-educated lady and interested in theology. And I'm glad to have you here, Anna Hamilton.
Thank you. Nice
What a
to be here.
pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Knight.
Tell me, because I don't know exactly, what is restorative justice?
Well, first of all, restorative justice is how do we repair the harm caused by violence that takes place in this world? And one would think it's about fixing problems and restoring things and putting it all back together like a nice little puzzle. But the puzzle is huge, and there are many people affected by it, and many times puzzle pieces go missing. And so our role is to be an active, present person in the ministry of the church, within the prison walls, the jails, or out in the community with the families. And so we do a lot of work being there for them and finding volunteers who can come and be present with those people to pray with them and take time with them.
How long has the church been formally working in this area? Was it generated from something else and grew into this concrete program?
I'm not familiar with the whole history in our particular diocese, but I do know that for the last 12 years there's been some form of restorative justice taking place. And so either through social concerns, it's always been kind of tied together in that respect. So restorative justice now belongs to our Department of Life, Dignity, and Justice. And in that department, we cover different avenues of social concerns and advocacy and pastoral care, reaching out to the immigrants, reaching out to the incarcerated families, and those involved with mental health and reaching to the sick. So we have a very wide net that we cover in this department, and we look to try to bring some form of, in many ways, direct services to a lot of the people in the communities.
How many people are involved on a paid basis, and how many people are involved on a volunteer basis?
We're a small department. There's maybe about 10 of us. And really, it's volunteer-based. I think every office has maybe more than 100 volunteers on some level, and so we have to reach out. We are a large diocese. We have 94 parishes that we have to find a way to serve and to bring them the resources and the necessary responses that they need so that they can be better ministers to themselves and their own communities.
How does the program work? People are referred to you? Do you have outreach looking for people to help?
For restorative justice, it varies all the time. Sometimes we'll have families contact us because their son or daughter is in prison and they want a priest to come and visit them, or just someone to be there for them, to check in on them. We don't do that ourselves. There are some chaplains in some of those facilities that serve. Many chaplains are there because they're hired in from the state to serve. So they don't only serve the Catholic communities, they also serve all denominations and all walks of life within the facilities. And so we just do our best to be that middleman, to try to connect them in some way and provide them the resource they need.
Is there a demographic, an age range of people that you are the greatest part of your work?
Oh, it varies, all ages. You know, we work in the juvenile halls as well. I can tell you my first experience going
Sure.
to a juvenile hall was an invitation to come and tour the facility. And as they took us on this tour, there was a boys' side and a girls' side. We stayed on the boys' side, but they took us to different cell blocks. And each cell was broken down by ages. So in the juvenile hall, it started at age 17, and they would show us their area of living, their common area, where they're fed, how they receive their education while they're there. And then we would go from age group to age group around the facility. One of the common remarks I would hear from the officers was, "My kid. These are my kids. They're good kids. They're my kids." And so I was reflecting on that the whole time. By the time we got to the last cell, which was the youngest age group, which was around 12 years old, I started to notice there's not just 12-year-olds in here. Turned out they had as young as 8 years old, and there was more than one. And it wasn't their first time there. These young children are constantly being brought in, sent home, but being sent back into their environment where it's unhealthy and they're being neglected, or the parents are addicts, or there's something that is causing this young person to feel more at home in a jail than to be with their own families. And so now it clicks. This is why the officers say, "These are my kids." This is the closest these young people will ever have to understand a parent's love. And that really touches the heart when I hear that.
I think it's common knowledge of people who look into this that the gang culture is really a different kind of family for these people. Do you deal with violent criminals as well?
Only when we're within the actual facilities. Outside, it's possible. We are on the streets. We do a lot of activist work, bringing a message of hope to the communities, trying to get people more involved. We do night walks every month with interfaith communities. So we're very active. We sit in city council meetings. We go out there, we get signatures. We bring all forms of communication to the public as best we can. We work closely with the chief of police and city council members, whoever we need to contact, to reach out to let them know that there's a problem here in the community, and we want to be direct towards it. We want an answer, and we want to be able to provide the right contacts for young people who are at highest risk, so that we can get them off the streets before there's anything else happening in their lives.
I imagine that this doesn't go down well with the criminal element, because the people they are trying to recruit are the people you are trying to turn away from that venture.
Surprisingly, there's a lot of people who might, for example, parolees, who are out on the streets now, but all they want is to get their lives back in order. The problem is their environment. If they're going back into the same environment that caused, the attitude to come out and do the crime, then there's going to be a struggle and a pushback to whether or not they're going to be able to succeed in the world on their own.
Now, as I understand it, there are other elements of your work other than visiting people in prison and providing services or direction. You deal with things like serious trauma,
Yes.
suicide, things like that. Tell us about what happens there.
Most of the work directly from the Office of Restorative Justice is with families of murder victims, families of the incarcerated, and at times it includes that of suicide as well. For the families of murder victims, we have done our best to provide an area of support for them. So we actually offer what we call the Journey, which is a 10-week support group. And it allows families to come together to share their story. It's what we call restorative retelling. And that is a holistic approach to healing and able to begin to start to work through some of the pain that was caused by the trauma of the death. We oftentimes share that same support group with those who have lost someone to suicide as well. So a lot of times we'll have the two groups together because they are experiencing what we call a type of complex grief that takes on more emotions than you might expect from a natural death.
Do you have partnerships with other organizations that are doing similar work?
Yes, absolutely. We partner with families and friends of murder victims, and we also partner with parents of murdered children.
Wow. When I think of an 8-year-old in juvenile hall, and that's like, how can that be? What kind of behaviors a child of that age be involved in that would require incarceration?
Most young people, when they're not satisfied in their own home environment, if they feel they're not being listened to, being given that attention of love, they become searchers. And so they head to the streets and they search, looking for something to do, something that will grab their attention, maybe something that will inspire them. However, oftentimes they run into gangs on the streets. And who better than to open their arms and embrace them are these people who are in the same situation. They understand them. They talk their language. There's a developmental stage missing and a component missing from this growth because they've left the home environment and gone into the world environment. And so because of that, our young people, they become embraced by these gangs. And what happens next? Some type of an initiation. What do they have to do to be a part of this gang? So they pick up the skills of crime, of stealing or, robbing stores or other things, but something that pulls them into more of a dark side of life, rather than the light side of life.
The dark side of life.
Yes.
Well, it's frightening to think of this ever-growing kind of thing, too. Yeah. We'll be back soon with Anna and talking more about restorative justice and some other things. Stay with us.
You have heard the traditional Veni, Creator Spiritus, Come Creator Spirit song. We do not know the author of this song. It is an invocation to the Holy Spirit, and it is sung in the Catholic Church during the liturgical celebrations of the Feast of the Pentecost. It is also sung during the ordinations of priests and bishops and at some solemn events. It is such a heavenly feeling and experience when we listen to it being sung in Gregorian chant. Father Mike Manning has written a booklet to understand this great song of praise. He takes the English translation of the song and explains it in detail, but in plain language. It will surely help you understand and pray with this song in praise of the Holy Spirit. We want you to have a copy of this booklet.
Call the number on the screen or email us. You can also order it through our website. Come, Holy Spirit, enlighten our minds and hearts.
Thanks for rejoining us. We're with Anna Hamilton. We've been talking about restorative justice and how big the problem is and how widespread it is, the reasons for it. And I'd like to talk a little bit with you, Anna, now about the things that you're looking forward to adding on to what you're already doing. You told me earlier that there's a new team in the works. What will they be doing?
So This is actually separate from restorative justice. Within the diocese, we also have many subcommittees that work in many avenues to address many topics that come up in our parishes. And so one of the main topics, as I was kind of hinting at earlier, is that of suicide. So we have formed a suicide task force to really address this, to have the right resources information for parishes so that they themselves are trained, they're informed, and they know how to respond in situations where someone might be contemplating suicide. And so that is our goal, to take this task force and to really build something positive for the communities.
How I don't know, percentage-wise, what percent of the population, the wide population, actually is either thinking about suicide, have tried it already, or have done the final deed?
So some basic statistics I can share is back in 2016, there was nearly 45,000 suicides nationally. In 2018, it was the number one leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 14. In 2019, we can add to that number, and it was number one for Latino women, young adults, up to about the age of 24.
That is startling.
So on average, probably about 123 suicides a day.
A day.
Nationally, yes.
And I know as a veteran myself and involved in Veterans Affairs that veterans, their suicides, 20 per day.
Correct.
Or more. What kind of things you do in a program like that?
Right now, we outsource with the direct programs offered by the county. There is a program called ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. Make sure I get that right. And ASSIST comes in and does a 2-day awareness training and intervention skill training. And so we have been spreading that training among several of our young leaders in the communities, youth ministers. We've tried to invite pastors as well. It's really open to anyone who has an interest in this and wants to be more aware and wants to be able to identify the signs of suicide and be proactive for any situation that might arise.
I would imagine that there is a general treatment for all demographics. How does theology work in with the work that you do?
Well, with the theology of the church, we have to understand, first and foremost, and this has been a change in our catechism as well, when it comes to suicide, we have to remember that every person is a child of God. First and foremost, every person is a child of God, made in God's image, and most importantly, is loved. And that's a message a lot of people forget when they're contemplating suicide. They forget how loved they are and how traumatic it would be to leave their family behind. They think they're doing us a favor. They're not wanted anymore. They're not necessary. However, the trauma that they leave behind is even greater and adds even more potential for future suicides for other people who knew them. So we have to be very cautious. And the church does love. The church wants us to know that we have a dignity to protect life and that we have to be present to people to share that so that they know it more deeply in their own souls. The only way this will pass is if the crisis in their life passes.
And does that mean that families have to be involved? You can't just treat the victim or the person who's contemplating. You have to go with the families and make that an interactive kind of thing?
You have to address what the crisis is. If you can identify the crisis, then therapists can lead you on where to go from there. It might involve family. I always recommend to my families, your child has attempted suicide. We need to get them assistance. Let's get them to the right resources. Now, once they're settled, what are you going to do at the same time? You need that resource as well. You need to go to see the therapist so that you two can learn together how best to support each other. you have to have a safety plan in place, because chances are once a person who's attempted will try again. So what is the safety plan that you can put in place to help them to prevent any future attempts?
I understand that one of the techniques that you use are in retreat settings.
The retreat settings are a way for us to help the individual identify what their crisis is. We allow people to talk. We allow them to tell their story. Everything we do is not to impart or impose ourselves into whatever their crisis is. We want them to identify the crisis for themselves. Once they can identify it, and we can give them some tools to go back and say, okay, now here's how I approach my crisis, and here's how I can find my way to survive through that crisis.
There are techniques, for example, in dog training. You give them a treat, and they will repeat good behavior to get the treat. What kind of things? I would imagine a lot of people, I don't know, you can't help me, I'm so bad off. Are there some special techniques that you can use?
One of the techniques I find always really helpful is the breathing techniques, as well as pressure point techniques. So for right now, I could be having a lot of anxiety sitting here having an interview with you right now. Honestly, we have pressure points in our hands. All we have to do is just simply put pressure on our fingers.
Demonstrate that for me.
Just as simple as this. Just enough pressure that you can kind of feel the warmth of the blood flowing underneath. And it actually helps to calm you from your fears, your anxieties, your anger, all those things that are attached to our emotions. Little things like that are right here within us. And we just have to
pay attention to that.
just a little bit of pressure.
And I feel the warmth right away and the pressure.
And it automatically begins to calm you a little bit.
Are there any other things like that? Because this is nice to know.
This is the nicest one because nobody ever knows you're doing it. The other ones are a little silly. There's tapping techniques where you can tap your forehead and under your eyes. All these little places where there's pressure points on your nose, under your lip, your collarbones, and my silly one right underneath your shoulders there, in the armpit. Those are places that we can actually just kind of tap a little bit. I can't tell you how I've sat through some of our support group sessions, and I'll have someone who's really just having a moment, and the anxiety is pouring from them, and you see their face completely in this really tense moment, and then I'll simply just say, okay, are you doing your little pressure points, or and before you know it, or we get to tapping, and before you know it, we're talking at a normal level again within seconds. It's really a beautiful and effective way to help calm yourself.
Doing this one.
Oh yeah, the monkey move is what I call it.
Say, what's that, your monkey impression?
Right.
What are you doing there?
So those are nice little ways that we can
You talked
help.
about the breathing.
And for
too.
breathing, absolutely.
Tell me about that.
So with breathing, it's just a matter of slowing ourselves down, being intentional with our breath. Taking a deep breath in, holding it, and then slowly releasing it. And to do that a few times, and then just to breathe normally, and then if you still feel kind of tight, just do it again a couple more times. They're simple ways of just simply taking a moment to calm ourselves. And of course, these are techniques we learn from others from the professionals who really use this on a day-to-day basis. So these are the things I've picked up in ministry that I've been able to share with our parishioners, our clients, those who come in.
Have you ever come across somebody who makes up their own kind of treatment, and it works for them, but no one else ever heard of it?
Some people will say they have their own way of doing things. They don't really explain a lot, so I'm not really sure what they're doing. But I have heard some people say shopping therapy or window shopping therapy is really good. And so, little things, anything that gets them a little active tends to be very helpful. Maybe just walking around, doing a little bit of exercise.
There's a phrase that's commonly known, music hath charms to soothe the savage breast.
Yes.
For me, those situations end up at a keyboard.
Okay.
My psychiatrist is a Technics keyboard, and I can just...
It's an action, but it's an action.
It's an action.
It's
thing,
something
yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a distraction that tends to calm the mind and the body.
So there are things that you
Yes.
can find for yourself that no one ever heard of, no one ever
Right.
told you, and it works for you.
Yes.
We were having conversation before, and a quote stuck with me, so I wrote it down. It said, "I need help." Can you talk about what that means?
There are many signs when someone might need assistance. You know, you might be able to tell right away they look depressed, or maybe you know their story. Maybe they've been bullied, or maybe they lost a loved one, and so they're dealing it the best way they know how. And once in a while, they'll actually use the words "I need help," but oftentimes they don't use those words. We have to be proactive and say, "How can I help you? How can I help you with whatever's going on? If you just need me to sit here and listen to you, you got it. If you need me to do something, let me know so I can try and help you." But if we can just offer that little tidbit, "How can I help? How can I help you?" You've opened a door to someone who's been asking to be heard. And that in itself is healing.
That's really neat. Hey, you can help. If you see something that tells you this person needs assistance, you have a place to go to, and maybe something that you can do personally. Volunteer, get some information about it, join the group. I want to thank you very
If
much.
I can,
Yes,
if
go
I
ahead.
can impart, more importantly,
Yeah,
another way you can help is to know the suicide hotline number.
the suicide hotline
Which
number. We're going to
is-
flash it on the screen, I'm sure.
Yes, which is 1-800-273-TALK 8255.
Anna, I can't tell you how much fun it has been and so
Thank
informative.
you for having me.
And if you see me doing this, you'll know.
I will know.
I'm not fixing my shirt or my sweater. I am actually doing that.
Good for you.
So you can continue that work. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. And take heed of all the suggestions we had, and maybe find it in your heart to be able to get out there and help with Anna and her friends. No matter where you are, no matter where you see this, there's somebody waiting for you to give assistance to people who really need it. So
Thank
once
you.
again,
Thank you so much.
God bless us. God bless your work. God bless our audience, people out there who support the ministry, and keep up the monkey.
Amen.
God bless.
God bless.